All right, guys, welcome back to Hobson's Choice Harleys. We've been bouncing around like crazy, been selling a lot of parts. Really appreciate everyone subscribing. The subscription rate's gone up, which really helps the channel flow. Sold a lot of parts through the YouTube channel, which is awesome. So the Knucklehead, just FYI, we're still working a lot on the Knucklehead. Right now, the Knucklehead motor has been kind of put on the back burner a little bit. When we started doing the machine work up in Colorado, it turns out that the flywheels are 80-inch flathead. So that motor is stroked and it's going to continue to be stroked. Created a lot of machining issues. So we've got to do some machining issues on the cylinders. We got to run stroker plates on the top of the crankcase to get the piston clearance. So it was not as easy as line boring out the cases and throwing some bearings in it and assembling it. The wheels did get trued. I mean, they are right on the money. There's a whole video with some steel pictures and some video shots of me and Doc working on that, and there's still more to come on that. So we kind of put that on the back burner. While I was up there, you guys have seen a little bit, I ended up picking up this 1965 Panhead, and this is, for me, as bone stock as I've ever had of a bike. It's got a few odds and ends that aren't correct, but very few. It's numbers matching, paint, a motor, everything's done. The motor only had like 50 miles on it, but it was rebuilt in Colorado at a reputable shop. I know the shop that built it. And after it was built, it had a couple of break-in runs on it, you know, where they broke in the rings and stuff. And then it's been parked for more or less 2 years. So when I got it back here, the carburetor was tuned at 9,000 feet elevation. I'm at about 5,000 feet. So she ran, but not very well. The oil smelled like gas because, you know, the carburetor was leaking, so it passed the rings. So I had gas in the oil. The gas in the tank smelled like lacquer. So basically just giving this thing a once over. I've dumped the fluids out of it. I've played with the carb. I've got it all running really good. And unfortunately, my crush washer down here that holds that float bowl is leaking. And I'm real afraid of that old Linker carburetor of snapping the threads. So I just ordered the kit for it. We got to pull this carburetor today and replace that crush washer. And as long as the fluids are done leaking, I can go ahead and put the tanks back on it. And I am going to drain the oil again and put fresh oil. So I put 3 quarts of new oil. I've ran it, 3 or 4 times for 10 minutes a piece to circulate that oil. We're going to blow that oil out and then start with fresh oil, fresh fuel. I've got all the wiring issues worked out on it. So she's about road ready. I did pick this up online, this buddy seat, which to me is just cool with the capital K. I've got a lot of people, my buddy Billy in England is calling it the iceberg. He said that's the ugliest seat Harley ever invented. I dig it, you know. So I've got this big old buddy seat, which is cool. I've got the helper springs. I've got to get the brackets finished for the helper springs. It's got this big old Christmas tree on the back with all these lights. And if you check it out, I've got them all wired in. Everybody's working. You're going to see this thing if you come up behind me, which is very cool. So yeah, today we're going to pull that carburetor, see if we can't fix that float bowl leak, and just keep playing. So we appreciate you watching. Keep watching. We'll bounce from this to the Knucklehead to the whatever. I mean, there's so much stuff going on around here. And as you're watching the videos, any of the parts you see on the wall, if you're interested in any of that, let me know. Or if you just have a need for parts, I've got a lot of stuff that's not visible. I've got stashes of parts everywhere on this property. So give me a shout if you need anything. All right, guys, so we're back here turning some wrenches. We're tearing apart. So questions were asked, so I'll explain it to it. And I've had some people tell me I'm wrong, but that's all right. I've been wrong before. So this is a 1965 Harley-Davidson FL Panhead. It's the last year of the Panhead motor. So these look like frying pans upside down for people that don't know what a Panhead looks like. This is the last year they built this motor. It's the first year Harley-Davidson ever put electric start on a motorcycle. So this is the first year electric start. A lot of oddities on this bike, being the last year of this motor production, first year of the electric start production. The paint is called Hi Fi Blue, and that's where I've had some back and forth with a few guys. I've been told, and the research I've done, is this is an original paint bike. If you come over here and look, these tanks are 1 year only tanks. So they're 5-gallon tanks with the gas valve or the petcock goes through the tank. They only made those 1 year. And there's just some telltale signs of those being original paint, just the way the striping is. Some of the issues, and the guys, instead of being respectful, were rah, 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 rah about the fender. The rear fender is apparently a different year fender. So if you look at this, these holes up here on the fender would be for the other buddy style springs that were wrapped around here instead of these springs that are hooked up into the seat. See, so these springs can be folded up into the seat or used. I still have to put the brackets. So there is some question on this rear fender, whether it was color matched to match the Hi Fi Blue, which is high fidelity blue, which they came out in the 60s with because that was all the rage in the 60s. Everything was hi-fi. But as far as I'm concerned, I think it's an original paint bike with the exception of maybe the rear fender. And either or, however you look at it, it is a really close to stock machine. The oil bag is not stock. The oil bag from 65 to 69 should not have a fill valve here. Their only fill valve was up here where the oil filter is. That is a true OEM Harley-Davidson oil bag. It's just has a side fill, so it's a little later unit, which is okay. The brake line was not run correctly. This brake line should be looping under the sprocket, and then it should have a joint here, which would be, this would be a rubber line, and then from here it would be steel lined up to the brake tree. So there's a couple odds and ends. Motor numbers match, belly numbers match, the frame number is good, and it only has a frame number on the motor mount because there was no frame numbers in the 65 era. Front end is correct, even the windshield is correct. So it's debatable on a few of the aftermarket parts, but it's pretty correct from my standpoint. I did have some issues over on this side. The distributor was the cam inside the distributor didn't hardly move, and it had a lot of trouble. So I did have this. This is an OEM Harley distributor off a 67 generator shovel. I stuck that in there, and I went ahead and put the eBeyond system. So that's the electronic ignition for this. And then right now what we're working on is I've got to get this crush nut, this copper washer in here is leaking. I thought I had oil leaking up here at the generator, but when I looked at it and I got to playing with the bike, this horn mounts up here, and the fuel was dripping. So this goes down inside here. The fuel was dripping out of here onto the horn and dripping right down the front of this engine. So my leak was actually just a fuel leak from the bowl. It had nothing to do with any of the oil. Since I've got it running, I don't have any leaks. The other side, I have a little bit of leaks under the primary, which is probably just the gasket, but the motor's not leaking at all. So I'm trying to get the fuel leak fixed so that I can get the tanks back on. And then after that, I've got to adjust the clutch and the mousetrap. And then she's about ready for her maiden voyage here in New Mexico. So unfortunately, I have no way to get that bowl off because of this support bracket without taking the whole carburetor. So I got to pull the carburetor off, take that bolt off, put that bolt back in, and then reassemble everything. And then we'll see where we're at from there. Okay, so a couple questions. So this is actually the battery box. So that's just your battery. That battery is the size of a car battery because that's basically a car starter that turns this machine over. So the box is a battery. This is your voltage regulator. And then I was asked, well, what is that silly thing up there? Well, check it out. So when you turn this on, and I've got my headlight up there, if I turn my high beams on, that tells me the high beams are running on the bike. And like all the vehicles in the 60s, your high beam indicator was red. And I think it was in 72 or 73, the federal government, and all their knowledge, made red dash lights illegal because people were freaking out thinking there was something wrong with their vehicle. So I think it was in 1972, cars, motorcycles, any dash lights like that had to be blue or green. They couldn't be red anymore. The only exception to that was, I think, the check engine light when they came out with those idiot lights on some of those machines. So kind of cool to have that original red light up there in the dash. So we're just taking this carburetor off. See, and this is the thing that really is impressive. If you look at these bolts that are holding the carburetor on, they are true old school. You know, they've got the crush washers, they've got the flat. I mean, that's original hardware. A lot of people don't care, and in most of my bikes, I don't care because they've got, you know, they're 50, 60, 70-year-old machines that have been hodgepodge together. This one has got a lot of period correct stuff on it, so it's kind of cool. And it takes a lot longer to do everything because you want to make sure you don't mess anything up. So the disassembly and the reassembly is just slow, painstaking, making sure everything's done correctly because you don't want to mess nothing up. These parts are getting harder and harder to find. A lot of this stuff you can buy repops, but to find original equipment like that linker carburetor that we're playing with, you know, you can find them, but to find that M74 linker carburetor in good condition, I've seen them go for $800. I mean, they kind of start at like $500, and you don't even know what condition they're in at $500. So it's a labor of love. I had a guy on my personal page just the other day, and he was talking crap about Harley and how he loves his Honda. And it's like, you know, whatever you ride is fine. I could care less. But, you know, me personally, I can sit out here and wrench for 2 hours on one of these old machines and go ride for 10 minutes. And I actually enjoy the 2 hours wrenching as much as I do the 10 minutes riding. I don't know. That's just me. That's kind of my old lady calls it my happy place. If I'm out here turning wrenches, life is good. So see what I'm doing here is I try not to pull the whole choke assembly and throttle assembly off. What I'm hoping to do, it's hard to see, but that nut, all that does is hold the bottom of this carburetor. See that bolt comes through? There's nothing there, and you can see the gas dripping out of it. This anchor is what keeps the carburetor from bouncing around. And all I'm trying to do is take this bolt off and replace that copper washer. And it's called a crush washer because it actually, that's what it does. It crushes and creates a seal. So I'm leaking here. That's my problem. So I'm going to see if I can pull that out and just put the crush washer back in there. Other than that, the bike ran fine. I did spray some WD up here while it was running. I had no intake leaks. The bike just ran really good. So let me see if I can find a wrench that'll fit that crush washer fitting. And if not, we'll have to go old school. I think we're going to have to go old school crescent wrench. Well, maybe. I got one more option. It's funny about, I don't know, it's probably been 10 years ago. My son actually went to MTI out in Phoenix. He was going to do diesel mechanics, and I gave him a boatload of my wrenches. In fact, I gave him all my great big wrenches, and God only knows whatever happened to that stuff, but I need to invest in some of my bigger. I think I've got a 7/8 and a 1-inch are my biggest wrenches that I've got right now. And the crescents get the job done, but you'd hate to round something off. Okay, so I've had this all apart, and I flipped that crush washer in hopes of, there we go. All right, so that's our culprit, and that just crushes, and that's what creates your seal. And see that other bolt that goes on there? This does nothing but hold the bolt, the float bowl on. So when I got this bike, it was leaking out of this crush washer. So we're going to fix that here in a minute. And also, if you look in here, it's hard to see, but there's a needle down inside there. So that's your needle and seat. When your bowl comes up, see how it drops down there? That's what shuts your fuel off. That seat was actually laying in there sideways. It wasn't even hooked up to anything. So it's like, wow, it's a wonder this thing ran at all. And just a little bit of fine tuning, and it actually runs pretty good now. And now I got gas everywhere. That's all right. You can see it's flushing all that funk out of everywhere. Let me see where did I put that crush washer? All right, guys, so I found my crush washer, and you can see here's the old one versus the new one. See these, it's almost round where that one's flat. This thing's been crushed way many times. So hopefully the new one ends my fuel woes. Because like I said, I've had this bike running now a number of times since I got it home and tuned everything up, and it's running really good. So we're gonna get that on there. Oop, if we put it on the right way, it even helps more. Okay, and then we're gonna put our new crush washer. And then we're gonna put our, that's the one. Now hopefully I've got the float adjusted correctly, and we get that new crush washer in and put her back together. And then I probably will hook up my cheese ball funnel and put some gas in it and make sure that she doesn't leak. Okay, so it shouldn't have to need any more than that. And then we're going to set that there. And we're just going to start this one a little just to hold everything in place while we go around to the other side. Oh, Oh, I didn't like that. Okay. So if you see that moving, that bracket, that means she's a little loose there, which I don't like. But hopefully I can just snug that nut down on the other side. So that bolt goes all the way through the engine case. So I'm just going to put this on a little bit. I want to get the carburetor sucked back up into place first, and then we just keep playing. Oh, I did do that. I forgot my spring in the bowl. Well, better now than later. Get busy out here talking and rambling on and forget doing what I'm doing. All right. And then we had rain here last night, so it is hot and muggy. And unfortunately, when we're doing all this filming stuff, I've got the little air conditioner over there running, and it helps a little, but the great big fan that I usually run right here beside me to cool off the place, we don't run it because it just drowns out the audio when we're trying to record. So it's just a hot, muggy day here in New Mexico. Okay, so we got that started. In case any of you gurus out there is going to reach out and comment about that gasket, that intake gasket where the carburetor mounts up to, I'd already replaced that, so I'm not worried about it. Oh, looky there. See, that's kind of cool with those slotted screws. You can usually get them started first and not fight things so bad, because it's hard to get those to sit in a socket and feed them up inside the cylinders like that. So, all right. Where's number 4? Yeah, just like I had said, these being the right bolts are one thing. The choke assembly being correct, the engine mount correct, the horn mount. I mean, this bike has not been molested or stripped of any of its originality. There's some guys arguing with me about is it or isn't it original paint. I'm not going to argue. I think the tanks are, maybe they aren't. I know the bike is clean. It's the nicest complete Harley-Davidson I've ever had, and I've had dozens of bikes in my day. It's just taken me a long time to get to a place where I can afford a machine like this, because trust me guys, these are not cheap in any condition. And then one that's this clean, let's just say I paid dearly for it. You notice I'm doing these in a pattern, and I'm just going snug in a little. Okay, so we're back up to carburetor back in place. And then we're going to tighten that bottom support here. And all that does is keep any shake off the carburetor. On these motorcycles, you have a tendency to have air leaks on the carburetors because you don't have a bracket underneath here. Like the S&S has a bracket that hooks to the air cleaner that bolts up in under the shovel heads. There's usually some sort of bracketry holding the carburetor a little tighter. And unfortunately, a lot of times those get butchered or doesn't get reinstalled. And then your carburetor shakes and it blows out the seals. So typically if you got a bike that's running rough, but running, you start by spraying up into the intake and see if you've got intake leaks. Okay, and then I want to go over to that other side and see if I can tighten that nut up inside there. Okay, so she's nice and tight now. Nobody's moving. All right, so our next step is going to be, I'm going to route that fuel line contraption I had made up back over here. And we're going to hook the fuel line back up. In case you didn't realize, inside here, this is all original too. So inside here is your fuel strainer or your fuel filter. I'm not going to pull it off, but that's just a fiber filter, cylinder filter in there. Oh, there it came out. See, so that's just a little mesh filter that filters your fuel so you don't get any contaminants up inside your carburetor. And it's got the new O-rings on it, or the new corks on either side of that. So just very cool, neat old machine, very simple engineering. They didn't like have to reinvent the wheel or make anything crazy overcomplicated. It's all pretty simple stuff, man. So we got gas everywhere. We want to try and wipe some of that up. Actually, it's one of the best cleaners you can have, is some of that gas. It cleans all the funk and gunk. But I also don't want all this exposed gas when I fire it up here in a couple minutes. So we'll probably spray the deck down and clean that all up. All right, so we're going to put this up in here, and we're just going to start it. As you can see, you can rotate that to get your fuel line where you want it, and then you tighten it all down at one time. So where is my cheater? Okay,